Hey everybody, welcome out to the show Board Game Reviews. This is a YouTube channel dedicated to the tabletop gaming hobby, and this is a video series looking at the game of Windward. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to play the game. My goal is to help you get a tutorial video so you can bring this game home, pop it in the box, throw it on the gaming table, and start having fun with your friends. Now, the basic idea of the game of Windward is this is a cooperative or a competitive 1 to 5 player game which combines the idea of a nautical game with the idea of a space theme to create this interesting game where players are sailing across this giant gas planet trying to work competitively, or again, you can play the game cooperatively, trying to get the most notoriety. Once notoriety gets to a certain point, the game end stage is going to be triggered, players are going to do some more actions, and whoever has the most notoriety at the actual end game is going to be the grand winner of the game. Now, like I said, this video is part of a series of videos. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to play the game, but if you just want to get a quick overview, see some sample gameplay where I'll play an actual full game, or get my review of the game, check out the videos in the series. This is going to be a full tutorial video for the game only. Now, if you have any comments or questions, make sure to leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I will do my best to get them answered as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me at offtheshelfboardgamereviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. Definitely answer your email as quickly as I can. And if you enjoy this content, you enjoy this channel, if you enjoy this series, think about tossing $1 over in the tip jar over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/otsbgr. This channel is 100% sponsor free, so I appreciate any donations you want to toss in the tip jar over there on Patreon. And as always, thanks for watching. Come on back after a break for a full tutorial for the game of Windward. Now, before we get started here, I need to explain to you that the game of Windward comes with a whole bunch of different modes of play, and also comes with some built-in expansions right in the basic box when you buy it at retail. And I think this video would be a little bit too much to it if I explained you everything about the game, especially since I think the best way to learn how to play the game is to play the game as a competitive game. That is the basic building blocks for the entire game, and you need to understand the competitive game before you can understand some of these extra expansions, such as the naturalist, the great white whale, the achievements, and the various different ways to play the game, including that cooperative game mode. So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to play the game competitively. This video is going to be a full tutorial for the competitive game. Of course, if there's enough interest and people request enough, I would be happy to go ahead and shoot a second video, which is going to cover all the other things, including the cooperative mode and everything like that. But this is going to be a full tutorial video on the competitive version of the game, which is played from 2 to 5 players. So without further ado, let's go and start with the setup for the game, starting with a map of the world itself. So the game map for this game is double-sided, and it is going to come in a whole bunch of individual, let's just call them pie slices just to be fun and have a little bit of fun here. These pie slices are double-sided, and you can lay them out any way you want, which is going to change up the layout of the game every time you play it. But basically, the important thing to understand is there's a smaller side for the 2-player side, or a 3-player side if you want a really tight game, or you can play with the other side of the board, which is going to allow to play the game up to 5 players. And it's going to have a lot more exploration space for all the players. Once we decide if we're going to play with the 2 or 3-player side, or the 4 or 5-player side, or however creative or competitive you want to get, we're just basically going to build up the board by putting out these pie slices. Next thing we need to do is we need to add the base into the center of the board. Now, before I add this base into the center of the board, I need to explain to you that if you look at the bottom of the base here, you will see numbers on it from 1 to 6. And this is very, very important because many times we're going to have to roll a randomizer dice to see where certain things happen, such as where the gray Cresters come out. And if we're playing with the add-on that allows the great white Crester, it's also going to dictate where that comes out. It's also going to dictate the direction of the wind and dictate a couple different other things. And it's basically going to be associated with the die that's going to come with the game. So whenever it tells us to roll the die to get a direction or pick a pie slice, we're going to roll the die, and that's going to judge the section of the board that event is going to happen. So if I rolled a 1, since I placed the base out here like this is a 1 section, 2 section, 3 section, 4, 5, and 6 section. So depending on how I roll the dice, that's going to influence where certain events are going to happen. Next up, we need to gather up all the crew tiles. Now, there are a total of enough crew tiles for every single player to get possibly every single one of these crew tiles. These crew tiles are double-sided. One side is going to have the grass worker, the other side is going to have the purser for 5 of them. The next group of 5 is going to have the marine on one side and the sergeant on the other. And then the final group of 5 is going to have the harpooner on one side and then the coxswain on the other side. Now, the important thing to understand is that these crew members, once you hire them, they're going to be added onto your crew board. I'm going to explain all that in just a moment here. But just understand that once you hire a crew member, it is a permanent decision. You cannot fire any of these crew members. And there's only enough space on your board for a total of 3 crew members, and every space can only have one side or the other. So it's a permanent decision. It's going to help your crew throughout watch the gameplay for you. But just understand, once you hire those crew members, it's a permanent decision. Now, you don't need to shuffle the stack. We're going to simply place it over here on the board right here where the crew goes, because again, you get to select your crew, but that decision is a permanent decision for you. Once you do it, that's locked in for that entire game. Next up, you need to figure out what kind of expansions you are wanting to play with, or which kind of add-ons you want to play with. One of the possible add-ons is there's the achievements. If you're going to play with the achievements, you're simply going to randomly select 2 of them, and those are going to be allowed for all the players. Again, we're not going to cover this in this video, just to let you know that it does exist. Next possible option we can have is we can have the naturalist. Generally speaking, the purple player will be the naturalist, so if you're playing naturalist, purple is going to be your color for this game. Not going to explain the rules for the naturalist, just understand that that is what those tokens are for. Finally, the next thing we can have is the cooperative rules, which is going to use the life tokens for the captains and for the great white. But you can also use a great white in the competitive game, and using the great white means that he is just going to be an aggressor towards the other players who's going to appear during a later part of the game. Basically, once somebody gets to 10 notoriety or higher, he's going to come out on the board, and he's going to be a thorn in the side for all the players. Think Moby Dick. It's going to be the great white whale, which is going to hunt down all of our players' ships. Again, we're not playing with this, just showing you that is possibly an add-on that you can use for the game. Once you've figured out which add-ons you're going to use, and again, you can mix and match them. You can even do the whole kitchen sink approach and play with all these. And again, I must emphasize, learn the competitive game first before you start throwing all that stuff into that great grand kitchen sink. Next up, we need to figure out the player order, and player order is very simple. We're simply going to roll the die. Whoever rolls highest is going to be the first player, and then the first player is going to take their player board. Now, the important thing to understand about all these player boards is these player boards are a little bit asymmetric, so every single player board is going to play a little bit differently. And it's basically going to be your first and your second mate commands and the things that your first and second mate can do. For example, if we look at the green player, we see that their first mate, when at port, can take 5 supply cards as an action, whereas we see that this player at the port can take 3 supply actions. But if we see the difference here, we're going to say that this first mate, or second mate, whichever one you use, can gain you 2 morale at port, whereas it can only gain 1 morale at port here. And you're going to see that some even have different actions, such as the rest action, may be different for certain captains. So let's just go ahead and go over these crew boards right now, because I think this is a great time, because understanding how your crew board is laid out is going to be very important. So once every single player gets to the crew board, the next thing they need to do is they need to take their ship and their color, and they're going to place their ship right here currently at port, because every single player starts at port in every single game. Next thing you need to do is you need to take your 2 longboats. Now, your first longboat will not be in play, so you need to put it below your board. Or what I should do is suggest is placing it right there, just as a friendly reminder that once you gain either the harpooner or the coxswain crew member, you have now unlocked your second longboat. But you do have your first longboat, which you will place right here, signifying that you do have access to it at the beginning of the game. Next thing you will need to do is you will need to take your 2 crew members, who you will put down here just like that, signifying that since you're at port, you can start using these crew members at port at the start of the game. The next thing you will need to do is you'll need to get your 3 counters that we are going to use for various different things. One of these counters you're going to use to track your morale, which is going to start at level 1. Your morale is basically your hit points, and it's also going to affect how much potential, or I should say how efficient your crew is when it comes to processing things. Higher morale is, the better you process. The lower your morale is, the less you process, and also the closer you are to having your ship sink. Next thing you do is we're going to put a tracker over here, which is going to track the amount of current longboat movement we have. Longboat movement is very interesting. It never refreshes. We actually have to take an action to gain extra movement with our longboats. If we never take that action, we're never getting longboat movement, so it's going to stay at 0 unless we take that action, which is signified right here on the board. We see +3 longboat speed. Only way we get that movement is by taking that action with our first or our second mate. Finally, we're going to take the 3rd token, and we're going to put it over here next to the supply board, and this is where we're going to track our victory points. Again, don't forget that once somebody gets down to 15, and if you ever forget, it's an off color right here, showing a slightly different color on the notoriety track, but once somebody gets to 15, that player is going to trigger the end game, and that player is going to finish their turn. Every other player at the table is going to get 1 additional action. And if, after all the players have taken that 1 final action, if that 1 player still has the most notoriety, they're going to be the grand winner of the game. But if another player manages to match that player's notoriety, or if somebody manages to surpass it, that person who does the surpassing is going to be the actual winner of the game. But if somebody manages to match the notoriety of that player who got to 15 or higher, even though the track stops at 15, you can actually go past that. You're simply going to wrap the track. But if somebody manages to tie for the highest notoriety, then the game is going to continue for all the players. Not just for the 2 or 3 or 4 players who tied, but all the players are going to continue until at the end of a round, one player has the most notoriety, and then that's going to be the grand winner of the game. Now remember, like I said, we're going to judge who the first player is by rolling the die at the beginning of the game. So make sure you continue to track that, because it might matter when it comes to ties, but generally speaking, it's not going to matter too much. And generally, I also like to suggest that as players pass their turn, I like to pass the die to the next player, because we can use this for movement tracking. I'll explain to that when we get to the ship movement point of the tutorial video. Next up, we're going to shuffle a stack of supply cards, and then we're going to start handing out supply cards to all the players. The first player, which we've already decided by rolling dice, is going to gain 2 supply cards. Second player is going to gain 3 supply cards. The third player is going to gain 4 supply cards, and the fourth and the fifth player are each going to gain 5 supply cards apiece. Now, the interesting thing about supply cards is no player can ever have more than 5 supply cards in their hand. Now, there's one way to break that rule, and there's a crew member allows you to get your hand up to 6 supply cards. But the important thing to understand about this game is you can never go past that number. So if you have 4 supply cards in your hand and you take an action that gives you 3 supply cards, you're going to draw 1 supply card and 1 supply card only, because you can never go beyond that amount. You can't draw up and decide what to discard. Supply cards also can't just be randomly discarded for no effect. You have to discard a supply card by playing the card. So that does mean, remember, you can't go beyond 5, and you have to play a card to use it. Once all the players have gotten their hand of cards, depending if we're playing a 2, 3, 4, or 5 player game, we're going to take the remaining supply cards in our hand, and we're going to split this into 3 approximately equal stacks of cards. And then we'll place all 3 stacks on the supply board right here. Now, the important thing to understand about the supply cards is they're always going to be played face up in those individual stacks, and players can purchase from the supply board 1 card at a time, which allows you to see the next card in the supply stack, because all these stacks are placed face up. You can't just randomly look through that stack at any time and say, I wonder what action I can get if I look at the stack of cards. No, it's not what you're allowed to do, but you're allowed to draw through these cards at any time. The important thing to understand, though, is that when we discard our cards from playing them, whether it's going to be used as a supply action or playing cards for their ability, we're going to discard those cards face down. If any one of these 3 stacks is ever emptied, we are immediately going to take all the cards, including the discard pile, and the remaining cards that are face up, and we're going to shuffle all those cards together, and we're going to reform 3 equal stacks all over again. So again, we're always going to have 3 piles to choose from, but when players take an action allows them to draw from the supply deck, they're going to draw 1 card at a time and then decide where they want to discard or where they want to draw their next card from. So for example, if I took an action that allows me to draw 3 supply cards, I could take this heated shot right now, and then I can look up at the remaining 3 cards and decide which one of the 3 I want to take, and I go, coffee looks really good, I'll take coffee. And then I look and go, well, I got 1 coffee, I really don't need another coffee, but that fuel looks really, really good. I can go ahead and take that fuel card, and then those are my 3 supply cards. And again, when you spend these cards, you can put them face down in a discard pile, and we're not going to shuffle the deck again until one of those 3 stacks is completely empty out. Then we reshuffle all the cards again and reform 3 brand new supply decks. Next up, we want to put a little bit of supplies out for all the players. We want to have a supply section where we are going to have all the gray teeth available to all the players to grab from, all the red teeth available for all the players to grab from, and remember, these red and these gray teeth are going to be worth notoriety. Red teeth are worth 4 notoriety, gray teeth are worth 3 notoriety when we cash them in. Place out all the red cresters, place out all the gray cresters, put out the fuel tokens, the +2 combat, the coffee tokens, and make sure everything is in easy access for all the players. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to seed the planet with the gray cresters that are going to be out on the board. Now, generally speaking, there's always going to be an amount of gray cresters on the board equal to the amount of players in the game. So if we're playing a 5-player game, we're going to put out 4 cresters. If we're playing a 2-player game, we're only going to put out 1 of the gray cresters. And the way these gray cresters are going to come onto the board is going to be based on the random roll of the die. Now, there can never be more than 1 gray crester placed on the board in one of these pie slices. So if we roll a pie slice that's already occupied, we need to roll again. So since I'm going to show you how to play a 5-player game, just because that's why I set it up for you at the beginning, let's go and figure out what we do. So we just simply roll the die, and we get a 3. We look at the weather for the base and show this pie slice is going to get the first one. So we're going to look for the specific section on the board that shows for the gray cresters. Every one of the board sections has 1 spot for the gray cresters on it. So since I rolled a 3, the first gray crester is going to go here. Roll for the second gray crester, I will gain a 1, which is going to place it right here on the board. Going to roll for the third one, that will be a 6, which will place it right here. And then the final one, we will roll, and I will gain a 5. Luckily, I didn't get any duplicates, so that is basically how we put out all the gray cresters for a 5-player game. Now, it's very important to understand about this game, and I'll cover this when I talk about the world and the map itself, is that this game deals with elevations. There's an upper elevation where the ships where the red Cresters and where the white Crester like to play, and they hover around on the upper, higher elevations of the game. And then there's the lower elevations of the game where the gray Cresters and the longboats interact. Now understand that the upper and the lower never really interact with each other, so a item like as a longboat or a gray Crester could interact with the lower sections without ever interfering with anything on the upper sections. So a ship could fly over a gray Crester, a red Crester could move over a gray Crester, but a ship can never move through another ship. A longboat can never move through another longboat. So basically the elevations are extremely important in this game. So make sure you're paying attention to that, and I'll go over that when I talk about how the movement works in this game. So continuing the setup, the next thing we need to figure out is we need to figure out what direction the wind is going. Wind is very important in this game because remember, this game is very much inspired by the Age of Sail. You can never work against wind, but wind can definitely work in your favor. So to start the game, we need to figure out what direction the wind is going, and I will roll a 2 just for the sample. I'll look at the board and we will signify that the wind is blowing this direction. Now the wind is going to change direction at the start of every single round, starting with player number 1, except for the setup round, so we're not going to need to roll this again. The important thing to understand is before player 1 in every individual round takes their turn, they're going to roll the wind die, and the wind is going to change directions. The wind can never be in the same direction twice. So for example, if the wind is in this direction, and if I roll the die and if it came up as a 2 again, I have to keep rolling until I get a result that is not a 2. Oh, just like that. So now, since I rolled a 1, now the wind is going to blow in this direction. Additionally, when it comes to the gray Cresters and the red Cresters, you can never have anything that is of the same elevation occupying more than one spot if it's a like item. So that means you can never have 2 gray Cresters in a spawning ground. You can never have 2 red Cresters in one single spot. You can never have 2 ships in a single spot because that would actually start a fight. And piracy is allowed in this game. You can attack the other players. So after we figure out the red, or after we figure out the wind, the next thing we need to do is we need to populate the board with the red Cresters. Now the board is going to populate with exactly 6 red Cresters at the start of the game. They are going to start on the red Crester spawning ground. The thing that you need to understand is that the red Crester spawning ground is only important for the start of the game. After this, any red Cresters that spawn on the board are not going to spawn in the spawning grounds. Those spawning grounds are important only for the very start of the game. After that, you can pretty much ignore those spaces. They have no effect at all. The final thing we need to do is for setup is we need to put 2 canisters all across the board on the canister spots. Now these tokens are double-sided. One side is going to be gas tokens. The other side is going to show cannons, and we're going to simply place 2 of these all around the board. There should be 1 in every single pie slice. These are a one-time only thing, so much like the red Crester spawning grounds location. This is only going to be important at the beginning of the game. After the game has begun, and once these locations have been claimed by the players taking the gas from those locations, it's one and done. They are not going to refill it, just like those red Crester spawning grounds. Once those spots have been taken, it's done. So it is a race to go out there and get these gas locations as quick as possible, because if somebody takes them away from you, they own them. You're not going to be able to get the chance to get some kind of respawn at all. Now the game Windward is going to play out over rounds, and every single round, every single player is going to take their entire turn before the next player in player order gets to take their turn. And when it comes to your turn, the nice thing about this game is kind of very organic and have a strong fluid feel to it, because you can do your actions that are available to you pretty much in any order. Matter of fact, you can almost interrupt some actions in an effort to perform other actions. The basic idea of the game is on your turn, you're either going to do movement across the board here, moving to various different spaces based on the wind, and I'm going to explain how movement and the wind works in just a second, or you can spend supply cards from your hand. Now supply cards you can spend from your hand, you're basically going to spend them face down to the discard pile and do whatever the supply card tells you to do. And these supply cards have various different things such as combat effects, allow us to adjust the weather, allow us to put bait out there to add more of these Cresters onto the board, and do various different actions, allows us to interact with the other players and the whales out here on the board. Additionally, you're also going to get some additional actions available to you based on whether the fact that you happen to be at port, which means you're going to be on your player board whenever we're at port, which is basically represented as being inside the city right here. We're going to place our ship at the at port symbol right here on the board, signifying by being at port. So if our ship is at port, we're going to be able to do the actions that are available to us by being at port. Or if our ship happens to be out on the planet itself, we're going to have a different set of actions that are available to us. And again, all these actions are going to be listed on our board. So if we're at sky, the actions we do is we drop a longboat or drop a longboat. I'll explain to you why that is on there twice in just a moment here. We get +3 to our longboat speed, and we get +3 to our longboat speed. We get +1 to our ship speed. We get process of a Crester. And the next things we can do is when we are at port, we have the options of taking supply cards. We can gain morale, we can fill a cannon, or we can hire a crew. Now the way we're going to be able to take these actions is we're going to take these actions by using our first mate tokens. And the way we're going to use our first mate tokens is based on where our ship currently happens to be. Now remember, the game has some specific terminology. A ship stands for our big ship right here. A longboat stands for our little longboat right here. So make sure you don't get it confused, because some things say ship, some things say longboat. Some things are very generic and don't specify ship or longboat. Some reference Crester. It's pretty darn obvious when you see the cards that do a really good job of being specific on what they specifically can be used for. So the way we're going to take these additional actions is we have a first mate and we have a second mate that's available to us. And if we happen to be at Sky, we can simply take the first mate or the second mate and place them on one of these actions to perform the action that we want to perform. Once the first mate has been placed on that action cannot be performed again. That's why you see some of these actions are listed here twice. And it's very important when you get the coffee supply card, because the coffee supply card gives you a bonus action token that you can place down here and take one of these various actions. The trick is here is once an action space has been taken, whether by a first mate, second mate, or by a coffee token, that space cannot be used anymore. So that's why you have duplicate copies of some of these spaces. So for example, if I have two longboats and if I want to drop both of them, I would have put one first mate there, and I'd put my second mate right there, or possibly use a coffee token. So these are all the different actions we're going to have available. Additionally, like I said, this game is extremely organic. If your ship happens to be at port and you have not spent any of your first or your second mate quite yet, you could possibly, if you wanted to, spend one of your first mates to hire a crew, add that crew onto your ship, and decide how you want that crew to be added. And again, once they're added, that's permanent. You cannot remove them. Then you could go ahead and start sailing, moving out across the board and moving and doing various different interactions with the board. And then, since we're now at Sky, I can send my second shipmate to do various actions, such as possibly dropping a longboat out here on the board. And that just shows you just how organic the game is. It allows you to kind of mix and match things up. And even during all these interactions, I could be playing supply cards. So that's why I emphasize you can actually interrupt actions with different things. I could move two spaces, spend a supply card, do one of my crew members, move another space, spend another supply card, and then possibly spend another crew member, or do something like that, and I can mix and match it any way I want, and I can end my turn at any time. Once the player decides to end their turn, what is going to happen to them is going to be based on exactly where they happen to be. And there is a nice, wonderful reminder on every single one of the player boards that's going to tell you exactly what is going to happen at the end of your turn. And again, like I said earlier, some of these player boards are a little bit asymmetric, so you can see a little bit of differences between some of these players. That's specifically why I put the red board out right here. So you're going to see right here that at the end of your turn, when you're done taking actions, again, you don't have to use all your movement, don't have to use all your cards, don't have to use everything. You use what you want on your turn, and then you decide that you're going to take the rest action. If you happen to be at Sky, the first thing you must do if you are at Sky is you must discard one of your supply cards. Now remember, your supply cards, when they're in your hand, they're basically a supply. If you spend them for an effect, you're going to put them in a discard and you don't have them available as a supply anymore. So what this is basically saying is you must discard one card from your hand into the discard pile, or you must burn one morale. If you don't have any morale left to spend, your ship is going to be sunk, and I'll explain to you exactly what happens when your ship sinks. But even if you don't spend supply, your ship can still be sunk. So make sure when you're out of space, floating around on the planet, make sure you have at least 2 points of morale or at least one supply card. Otherwise, at the end of your turn, you're basically going to be sunk. And it's not going to be a lot of fun for you, because you're going to lose a lot of things that you just worked really, really hard for. The next thing that's going to happen after you spend that supply or burn that morale, the player to the left of you is going to move the red Crester that happens to be in the same pie shape as you. And these red Cresters will never, ever cross the pie shape. So this red Crester is never going to hop over here. This red Crester is never going to hop over here. They always stay in their same pie shape. But the player to the left of you is going to move it 3 spaces towards you in an effort to be aggressive. Now this is a good time to actually explain how the board works and let you know there's some various different spaces on the board here. And let's go ahead and cover those various spaces really, really quick. You notice on the board you're going to have various little spaces that happen to have debris on them. Now debris are spaces that block all things are on the upper elevations and all things on the lower elevations. Basically that means that nothing can move through or into one of these debris spaces at all. Now there's a card that allows you to break that rule, and that rule is only broken for your ship, not your longboat. Is very, very important. But basically understand that nothing can move through these debris fields. Additionally, you're going to see some arrows on the opposite ends of the board here. Every one of these opposite arrows are connected to the space that is directly across from it. So if a ship, and only ships can do this themselves, went from here to here across the board, and that costs 1 point of movement. Ship can move from here to here for 1 point of movement, going ahead and crossing across the board. Additionally, there's going to be 3 Zephyrs that are located all across the board. There's only 3 Zephyrs on the entire board, and a ship only once it's in a Zephyr space, can spend 1 point of movement to move to one of the other 2 Zephyr spaces on the board. Now, anything can move onto a Zephyr space. A longboat, the Great White, one of these red Cresters, all of them can move onto these Zephyr spaces, but only a ship can use a Zephyr space to move to another Zephyr space on the board. It's a very important thing to understand when we're talking about movement. So basically what we're looking at is we have debris locations that nothing can move through. We have these Zephyr locations that are only usable by ships, and we have these ways across the board that is, again, only usable by the ships, not the longboats themselves. But back onto the point I was talking about earlier, the player to your left is going to activate the red Crester in the pie shape that you ended your turn in. And again, this is only if you're at space. Then they're going to move that red Crester 3 spaces towards you. If they manage to get to you and land in your space, they will start a combat with you. But if they don't do so, then nothing's going to happen. Additionally, other ships on the board can block off these red Cresters, and these red Cresters will never attack other ships. They're only going to attack the active players, so that may influence the directions this red Crester is going to move. So if the blue player happened to be out right here, and that means that the red Crester can never get to the red ship by going that direction at all, that means it pretty much has to move 1, 2, 3 that direction. Now the nice thing is, remember, there is elevations, there's upper and lower, so that means the red Crester could be right here in that gray Crester's location, because the gray Crester is at a lower elevation. The only thing that's going to block it is the Great White or another player ship, because it only goes towards the active player. After the red Crester moves, and if the active player still happens to be out in the great friendly skies and wasn't sunk by any actions that occurred by the red Crester activating or by player actions or something along those lines, that player and that player only is going to get 1 point of notoriety just for existing and surviving out there on the air currents for 1 round. And this happens every single round to every single player. If they survive their turn out on the planet itself, again, this does not matter if they happen to be on the dock, but they survive their turn out on the planet, they're going to gain 1 point of notoriety, which basically makes sure the game is going to continue to flow and make sure there's no players trying to stall out the game. Everybody's gaining victory points as long as they're out on the planet and pushing their luck and trying to go out there and gain the goals of hunting down various different things. Now, if a player ends their turn at port, that does mean that they are going to move both other ship captains, or first and the second mate, down to the slot down here, and that will signify that they get to do one thing for the rest action. We're not going to gain notoriety. We're not going to have the red Crester move, because remember, we're not in the space itself, so no red Cresters are going to move on this player's turn. We're not going to burn supply cards. We're not going to gain notoriety. We're basically going to gain whatever happens to be at the bottom of this card right here. Basically, when you're resting at dock, it's a lot less things that are going to happen to you, but there's also a lot less danger. After that player has done whatever rest action they're going to do, whether they're out on the planet or they're having to be at dock, then the next player in player order is going to take their turn. And we're going to continue going around and around just like this. The only thing that's going to change is that when the first player starts their turn again, before they start their turn, they need to roll the weather die and see if, not with, because it is going to happen, but see what direction the winds are going to change, because the winds have to move to a new direction every single round. Now that you understand the basic flow of the game, let's go ahead and explain all the actions we perform, and then you basically just know how to play the game of Windward. So on your turn, the very first thing that is available to you is the action of movement. Now, if your ship is currently at the dock and you're not currently on the board, it does take 1 point of movement to leave the dock and go out onto the ship, or leave the dock and bring your ship out onto the board itself. Whenever you come out onto the planet, you can pick any one of the adjoining spaces around the dock itself, even if it's against the wind. So generally you can't move against the wind, but you can exit against the wind just by doing so. Now, if you decide to exit the dock on a location where another ship happens to be, you immediately initiate combat. And I'm going to explain combat at the end of all the actions you perform on your turn. Just know that if you ever enter the space with another ship, it instantly starts combat. And not only that, if you start combat and if you lose the combat versus that player, you're going to be forced to go back into port or go back to the dock. If you win the combat, well, that other player's ship is probably going to be sunk, and then they are going to be sent to the port itself. But the basic way that movement works in this game is once you are out on the planet, you can move up to 4 spaces on your turn. And remember, moving from into the port or moving out back onto the planet from the port does use 1 of your points of movement. Now, the interesting thing about this game is, like I said, is very much inspired by the Age of Sail. And when you move, if you're moving with the wind all of your movement is free. As a matter of fact, if you line up just right, you can basically go all the way around the board as long as the debris does not get in your way. But if you're moving with the wind, all your movement is free. So for example, if I would to start my turn as a red player with a full 4 points of movement, and again, I like to use the weather die right here by passing around to other players so we track the amount of points we're moving. Let's say we as red players started in port and we decided to spend 1 point of movement to go ahead and leave, and we decided to come out on this location right here. Now that I've left the port first by spending 1 point of movement, since the wind is blowing this direction, I can now move as many spaces as I want in this direction, and it costs 0 points of movement. It's 100% free movement. The only time we're going to spend movement is if we move any other direction except against the wind. So if I were, for example, to leave port right here, sail all the way down, let's say I decide to sail right there, I can now spend 1 point of movement and move into this location right here, and that'll bring me down to 2 points of movement. The trick here is you can never move against the wind. So once I'm here, it is impossible for me to move here. It is not allowed until the wind chooses directions. From that point on, to move back, I now need to attack the wind by moving diagonal back and forth, which makes your movement very, very, very inefficient at that point. So again, moving with the wind, 100% free. Moving against the wind, impossible. Anything else is going to use one of your 4 points of movement. Now there's a way to get a 5th point of movement, and that is going to be on your player board. And to do so, you simply spend your ship captain or your first mate, and by doing so, that's going to give you 1 point of movement speed, and you simply add to your movement speed, possibly getting a 5th point of movement. Additionally, there also are supplies such as fuel that you can burn at any time to also give you points of movement. Additionally, you can also move your longboats if your longboats happen to be on the planet itself. Now, if your longboats are currently on your ship, you do need to spend an action by spending one of your crewmates and putting it on the drop longboat action space. And then once you put it on your drop longboat action space, you can put your longboat in the same space as your ship it currently is right now. Now, there's one little caveat to this rule. You cannot have your ship on a space with a gray Crester right now and then drop your longboat. That is not allowed. You have to actually drop your longboats next to a gray Crester space, and then your longboat can actually move into the gray Crester space. But the thing you need to understand here is, like I said earlier, when you looked at your player board, your longboats do not get any free movement at all. Matter of fact, before you get any points of movement on your longboats, you have to actually send one of your crewmates onto the spot right here, which is going to give you longboat movement. Additionally, you can also get longboat by hiring the coxswain, which can also give you movement points. The important thing to understand, though, is that longboat movement never ever refreshes. If you don't use one of your first mates to gain longboat movement, you're never going to gain it. So you need to make sure you're using your first mates to do that. And not only that, you need to use your first mate to launch your longboat in the first place. But once you launch your longboat, you're free to use this movement independently of your ship. So you can actually move your longboat a little bit, move your ship a little bit, move your longboat a little bit, and then even have your ship go ahead and pick up your longboat. Now, how does your ship pick up your longboat? Well, they just both need to be in the same space, whether the longboat moves into the ship space or the ship moves into the longboat space. Now, also understand that your longboat is the one thing that's going to be going out there and capturing the gray Cresters for you. When one of your longboats defeats a gray Crester, it is effectively towing that gray Crester, which means it's dragging it back to your ship. I'll explain to you how the processing works in just a moment, but just understand that while your longboats are dragging along these gray Cresters, other players with their longboats can also do the act of piracy, come out there and attack your longboats, and they successfully sink your longboat with their own longboats. They can start stealing your Cresters from you and the resources from you. So again, this game does allow a little bit of piracy and a lot of player interaction, which is one of the things I do greatly enjoy. So that's basically how the movement works. Just to cover a couple different things. Remember, your ships can move across the board by spending 1 point of movement. So if this ship happens to be here, spend 1 point of movement and I can swing all the way over here. It doesn't matter, the wind happens to be working against me. I can move across, but once I get there, I can't move against the wind. Remember, we can never do that. If we ever enter a space with some of those gas things, we can pick them up immediately, add them to our board, respecting the limits on our board. And if I didn't cover earlier, the limits are we can have a maximum amount of 4 gas tokens, maximum amount of 4 ship cannons. But if we happen to add the purser, it can allow us to get 2 more gas locations on our board. If we add the marine or the sergeants, to give us 2 more cannon locations. We also have our cargo hold. Now, our cargo hold is where we're going to add the +2 combat counters. I'll explain how those work when we get to it. It's also where you're going to put 1 Crester. When you manage to defeat it, your hold can never hold more than 1. It's also where you can put the teeth after you process your Cresters. You're going to hold an unlimited amount of teeth in your hold plus 1 Crester, whether it happens to be 1 red Crester or it happens to be 1 of the gray Cresters. You can only hold 1 of them in your hold at one time. Additionally, don't forget that your ships can also use the Zephyrs to move across the board regardless of the winds, regardless of the winds. English can be a little tough some days. Regardless of the winds, you can basically spend 1 point of movement to move to any one of the other Zephyrs on the board. The wind is not going to affect that. that. It only affects the movement of your ship. Now remember, the wind only affects your ship. The wind affects nothing else in the game. Your longboats, the red cresters, and the great white crester are not influenced by the wind. It's only your ship itself. If you ever forget, remember you got giant sails on your ship. Nothing else on the board has any sails on it, so it's not going to be influenced by the wind. I think you got the basic idea of how movement works, but movement is the most important thing to understand about the game. It's one of the places that's very easy to kind of mess up the game, because the rest of the game is just card play and going out there taking actions and trying to get victory points. The rest of it's pretty easy. Understanding movement is one of the biggest challenges of the game, and one of the areas that you can kind of make some goofs and stuff like that. Basically, just don't forget that if you move onto a space, you can pick the stuff up with your ship if there's stuff laying out there on the board, and just understand you can move out there and go ahead and just pick up stuff and attack other players. Again, I'm going to explain that combat in just a moment. Let's just go ahead and cover the player board really quickly, because that's a really important thing to understand. Every single player has a player board, like I said, where it's going to hold the cargo hold, where you hold the teeth, where you hold the one crester, no more than one crester, and unlimited amount of those +2 combat actions I've already showed you earlier. Next thing you're going to see is down here, it's going to show you the base strength for everything. Your ship has a base strength of 2, your longboat has a base strength of 1, your gray cresters have a strength of 1, and your red crester has a strength of 5. The great white has a strength of 8, but again, I'm not covering that in this tutorial video. Just understand its strength is just a little bit differently. Additionally, you're going to have a certain amount of spots for your gas storage, a certain amount of spots for morale. Your morale can never go beyond 4, and if your morale ever goes below 1 and you take damage and drops it down below 1, your ship is immediately going to be sunk. I'm going to explain to you exactly what happens when your ship is sunk. Next up, you're going to have your longboat speed. Remember, longboat speed never ever refreshes, and if you want to move your longboat, you need to use points of your longboat speed to make it move. Next up, we're going to have the section here where it says all the actions we can have for our first and second mate. We can drop a longboat, we can have +3 to our longboat speed, we can have +1 to our ship speed, and then we can process a crester. Processing a crester is something that's really important to understand about this game. So anytime you have a crester in your hold that you manage to defeat, you can take the action by spending your shipmate to go ahead and process the crester. Now when you process a crester, if it's a red crester, you are going to take a red tooth and add it to your cargo hold. If you manage to process a gray crester, you're going to take a gray crester tooth and add it onto your board. When you process a crester, you're not only going to gain the tooth, and you're only going to gain 1 tooth per one you process, you're also going to gain a certain amount of gas based on the current morale of your team. Now remember, you can have more morale than the maximum that's allowed in your stores, but if you happen to have 2 morale and you process 1 red crester, after the processing action you'd have 1 red tooth and 2 gas. If I happen to have 4 morale, I would go ahead and gain a total of 4 gas, 1 red tooth, and that would be my total rewards. But if I happen to have a gas worker and I go ahead and process a red crester, I would gain a tooth. I would actually gain 5 gas in this case, and since the gas worker can also hold gas, they would also give me those benefits. Now the benefits of the crew members we have, they're written down right here if we ever forget, but a person gives us +1 to our hand side, a gas worker is +1 gas per processing, and of course both these also increase our maximum gas we can hold. Next up we have the Marine, who has +2 hits against a red crester and a red crester only. The Sergeant's +1 die when your ship attacks. Remember, it's your ship, not your longboats. And again, once we select that, that's a permanent decision, but it does give us the capacity to carry 2 more cannons. And finally over here we have the Harpooner, which is going to be +1 to our longboat strength, which is +1 to the strength, not +1 to the dice we roll, but it's going to have +1 to our total strength. And then the Coxswain is going to give us +1 longboat speed for 1 turn. And again, at the moment we get the Coxswain, that's going to give us immediately 1 point of movement on our board. And then at the start of every one of our future turns, we're also going to gain 1 point of longboat speed. This is the only way we can gain longboat speed without sending our first mates onto the plus movement speed right there. That's the nice bonus of the Coxswain. One additional bonus of the Coxswain and for the Harpooner is once we get them into play, we now can bring our second longboat into play. Anytime a longboat is sunk, it is immediately moved back onto our board. Doesn't matter where it happened to be, anywhere on the planet itself. If it's sunk, it's going to move back onto our player board, which means we can immediately launch at a later date just by simply taking the drop longship action. Although the disadvantage of that is when our longboat is sunk, if it happened to be carrying anything, whatever it was carrying is going to be left in the space where it was sunk. That also happens to work for our ships. If our ships are ever sunk, everything that is in our cargo hold is immediately going to be dropped in the space where our ship was sunk. We're not going to lose our gas, we're not going to lose our ship cannons, just everything that's in our cargo hold when we're sunk is going to be left in the space. Whether another player sinks us, or whether it happens to be a red crester or a white crester that sinks us, those are going to cause everything that we had in our cargo hold to drop in our space, and then our ship is immediately going to return back to port minus everything we had in our cargo hold, but luckily we get to keep our gas storage and our ship cannons. But unfortunately, when our ship is sunk, our turn ends immediately. We are not going to do a rest phase. We're going to skip the rest phase anytime our ship is sunk. And since I'm talking about sinking our ships, let's go ahead and talk about combat right now. It's a good time to cover it. Anytime two ships occupy the same space, or a ship occupies the same space as a red crester, or anytime a longboat occupies the space of another opponent's longboat, or your longboat occupies the same space as a gray crester, we are going to start a combat. Now, when it comes to combat, the person who moved into the space is going to be the attacker. The other player is going to be the defender. And the way combat is going to be resolved is going to be with these dice right here. Now, these dice have a certain amount of tooth symbols on them, anywhere from 1 to 3. And this is going to be the total amount of hits that you get. The amount of strength you have dictates how many dice you are going to roll. So, for example, if this red ship would sail right into this blue ship space right here, we would now initiate a combat between the red and the blue player. Since the red player moved into the space, they are now the attacker, and they're going to take their total combat strength, and that's going to judge how many red dice they're going to roll. Then the blue player is going to take their total combat strength. That's going to be the total amount of blue dice they're going to roll. After the attacker rolls their dice, they're going to total up their results to get their total amount of damage they're doing. And then the blue player is going to total up all their dice from whatever they roll to get their total also. After we have the total for both the parties, then the red player can spend supply cards to go ahead and increase their strength and the amount of damage they're doing. And then the blue player also gets the chance to go and spend any supply cards to increase their strength. After that is done, we're going to compare the results. Whoever gets the higher result is going to be the winner. So, for example, if we had a combat here where the red player would roll only 3 dice, and let's say that the blue player is only going to roll a total of 5 dice, and this is what we rolled right here, we would see the red rolled 3 plus 2 is 5, while the blue player 3 plus 4 is 7. So in this case, the blue player would be the winner of the combat, especially if this is after the playing of supply cards. So anytime we have a situation like this, the person who lost the combat is going to take a total amount of damage and morale based on the difference, and they're going to be sent back to the space they came from. So for example, in this case, we see that since red got 5, blue got 7, that means red would take 2 points of damage and they'd be sent back to the space they came from. If they still have morale left after taking that damage, they're perfectly fine. They can continue their turn if they still have movement points left. Matter of fact, if they have movement points left and there happened to be another player right here, we can decide to go gung-ho and decide to attack that player now also. We just can't attack the player we just attacked. But if after the combat results are taken, we run completely out of morale, that means our ship has been destroyed. Now, if our ship is destroyed, remember everything that's in our cargo hold is going to be dropped in the space we came from if we're the attacker. If we're the defender and another player attacked us and sunk our ship, they're going to steal half of our cargo, rounded up, their choice, and then the rest of our cargo is going to be dropped in the space where we died, and then our ship is going to go back to port. Now, if we lose a battle versus another player and our ship happens to be destroyed, and again, this is only when it comes to ship-to-ship combat, whenever that happens, the winner of the fight, if our ship is sunk, again, this is only if our ship happens to be sunk by losing all of our morale, that means the winner of the battle is going to take any crester we have in our cargo hold that is not processed, plus half of the supplies in our cargo hold, and then our ship is immediately going to go back to port. The player who wins the fight cannot take our gas storage, they cannot take our ship cannons, but they are going to take half our entire cargo hold, rounded up, their choice, plus any crester that we happen to have. Then we're going to go back to port with the remaining supplies. And again, like I said earlier, anytime our ship is sunk, our turn ends immediately. We can't move our longboat, we can't do anything else. Sinking our ship basically ends our turn and we go back to port. The good news though is that any time a player loses a battle, or in case if we manage to get lucky and we manage to have a tie roll where both of our players roll exactly the same combat results, then and only then both the players are going to resume their prior spaces before the combat started. So example, red would move back to this space, and then each player would get one of these +2 combat tokens which can be used on a future turn. Now you can have an unlimited amount of these, and you're going to gain one of these every time you lose a battle, or anytime you tie a battle, or anytime your ship happens to be sunk. So the nice thing is if your ship happens to be sunk by another player, you do get a little bit of a consolation prize, and if they don't take that from you, that is something you can use at a later date. You're also going to get these anytime you also lose fights versus Cresters, which can be very, very nice, because these can help you in future battles and give you a nice bonus, and also make sure that this game doesn't have a runaway leader problem where somebody's just having bad luck with dice. because eventually you're going to get enough of these bonuses to go ahead and help you out. Now that I explained to you how the results of a combat work, let me actually explain to you the full process for a combat itself. So when we go into a combat, like I said, the very first thing we need to do is, as the attackers, we need to figure out what our total attack strength is. Our total attack strength is going to be based on any crew members we have, any supply cards that we might have, and also any ship cannons we want to discard. That is going to give us our total strength. Remember, every ship has a basic strength on it. And that's going to give us the amount of dice we're going to roll. So for example, let's just say I had one cannon to discard, and I have a red ship that has a basic attack of 2, plus I happen to have the sergeant, which is going to give me +1 attack. I am now rolling a total of 4 attack dice. Next, the other player I'm fighting gets to discard as many cannons as they want, and that's going to give them their total attack value also, and if they happen to have a sergeant, they'll also gain a +1 from that. After that happens, the attacker is going to roll their total attack dice, and then the defender is going to roll their total attack dice. Then each player gets to look at the results they have right now. Then we go back to the attacker, and then they get to decide if they want to spend any and all supply cards, plus any +2 tokens that they may have that they want to spend to go ahead and increase their attack strength. Once the attacker has locked in how many of those tokens and bonuses they want to spend, then it's up to the defender to decide how many supply cards they want to spend and how many plus attack tokens they want to spend. And then and only then we're going to compare the strengths, and whoever the loser of that fight is going to take the damage and morale, and then things are going to process. Like I already said, the loser who took the most damage, if they take more damage than morale, is going to be sunk, and they're going to be sent back to the port, and the other player is going to gain half of the supplies of the winner's gain half the supplies from the cargo hold of the loser, their choice, plus any Crester they may have in their cargo hold, while the defender goes back to the base with anything that's remaining, plus any gas storage, plus any ship cannons. That's how it works for ship combat. When it comes to combat between a ship versus a red Crester or a longboat versus a gray Crester, it's a little bit different how this works right here. So when it comes to red Cresters versus a ship, whether the red Crester is the aggressor or the ship is the aggressor, the attacker is going to roll their attack dice. Since red Cresters don't get supply cards and never get the chance to do so, they'll skip that part. But the red ship is the attacker, they're going to roll their attack dice. The red Crester gets to roll their attack dice, and then the red Crester or the red player gets to spend their supply cards and any other bonuses that they may have. Remember, you can also spend cannons to add your strength. And then the victor is going to be the one who does the higher die roll. Now, red Cresters, the great white Crester and the gray Crester only have 1 hit point, so you just need to beat their total by 1 to go ahead and successfully defeat them. But if you tie, you're going to get the +2 and sent back to the space you came from. Or if you lose, you're going to take damage based on your morale, and again, go back to that sinking that could occur at that point. If you win versus the red Crester, you're immediately going to put it in your cargo hold. Remember, you have to take an action to process it. So it's not going to be immediately processed. Remember, you can never have more than 1 unprocessed Crester in your hold. If your longboat wins a fight versus a gray Crester, that gray Crester is simply going to be towed along by your longboat from that point on until it can make it back to your ship. If it makes it back to the same space as your ship, it's going to return to your player board right here, and the gray Crester is going to be added onto your board. The trick here is, remember, you can have more than 1 Crester on your ship, not even mixing red and gray. So if this happened to be the case, this ship cannot return to our red ship until we process this red Crester. Once we do so, we're going to get the tooth, a certain amount of gas based on our morale, and then this ship could return to us. Add that Crester down there, and then the next turn we could send another process action, because there's only 1 process action available to every single player every single turn. Now, why are we processing all these Cresters? Well, we're processing these Cresters to gain teeth, because teeth are the other way we're gaining notoriety. Remember, notoriety are victory points in this game. If we can ever make it back to port, whether it's because we happen to get sunk and we still have some teeth aboard our ship, or if we manage to sail back to the port itself, we're going to gain notoriety based on the teeth we have. And those teeth are going to be cashed in immediately. Red teeth are going to give us 4 notoriety. Gray teeth are going to give us 3 notoriety. And one other thing I haven't shown you is another action we do in port, but let me go back to the player board and explain the other actions that are available to us while we're back in port. Anytime a player is in port, if they happen to have a first and a second mate available to them, they can use a first mate or a second mate to take supply cards, to gain +1 morale, to hire a crew, to fill a cannon, or players can also spend their fuel to go over here on the supply board to take any one of these actions that are available on the supply board right here, such as they spend 1 gas to fill a cannon, they can spend 2 gas to hire a crew member, they can spend 1 gas to buy some rum, which increases morale by 1. We can spend 2 gas to gain 1 notoriety, or we can spend 1 gas to go ahead and draw 3 supply cards. Remember that hand limit happens to be 5 cards unless you get the purser, which is going to add +1 to your minimum hand size. So that's basically everything you can do in port. That's basically the game as you can play it on the board right here. I think you have a really good idea exactly how to play the game of Windward itself. I know this little tutorial went a little bit long, but there's a little bit of minor details that this game happens to have. It has a easy flow to it, but there's a lot of minor rules that's very easy to skip or very easy to miss or very easy to confuse when you learn how to play the game. But once you learn the game, it flows really darn easily. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this video series. Remember, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching. Hi. Hi.